This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC, and I have such a treat for you. We have not talked in over 25 years, but this guy was one of my favorite variety acts back in the 80s. He is a comic ventriloquist, has had huge success. His ventriloquial figure, Chuck Wood, is famous in the world of ventriloquism, and he has done television, stage, all over the U.S., but in New Zealand and Australia, he's like a mega star, had his own TV show, just one hell of a successful guy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's David Strassman.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you, Scott.
Well, it's go ahead.
I'm not moving my lips. I'm not moving my lips right now. I'm not going to tell you where my hand is either.
Oh, that's so funny.
You have to understand, though, I stopped doing American television and shows in 1992.
Way back then, huh?
Yeah, and by the way, it's been almost 35 years since the last time we spoke or saw each other. I'm pretty sure the last time I played Laughs Unlimited in Sacramento was something like in the late 80s. Well,
let's use that as a grounding base.
Sure,
I want to share with the audience. I know that you started your life in entry into show business, doing some classes in Chicago. Ended up stretching your legs in New York. Can you share with the audience kind of a short synopsis of how you got going and how you picked ventriloquism?
Sure, you can read about it on my Wikipedia page, but other than that, I started ventriloquism as a 14-year-old. I took a class in junior high, or however you are in junior high, and it was a class for an easy A, and this teacher was teaching ventriloquism, and I thought, well, I'll just, skate through this. Turns out I was not only good at it, but I was good at manipulating the puppet. This guy had professional ventriloquist dolls, but he showed me how to advertise in a local newspaper to do kids' birthday parties. So I started doing that and making money as like a 14-year-old and getting free birthday cake. So,
well, that sounds like a perfect combination.
Yeah, it was great. And I went into theater in high school. My high school is New Trier West High School from Winnetka, Illinois. It's the same place they filmed The Breakfast Club. It was a massive, massive high school with a huge theater department. Our theater was better than some of the Broadway houses that I saw later when I moved to New York. So I wanted to study acting. The ventriloquism was kind of on the side. I did magic as well. I was one of those kids who needed love. So
great way to express that.
Oh, of course. All magicians weren't loved as children. That's why they do magic. But so I went to New York and I studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And after the first year, I got invited to the second year, but I found street performing. And I would bring Chuck Wood, my original puppet, out on the streets of Manhattan, and I made it a job. I'd do the Central Park on the weekends, Bleecker Street, the Village in the Saturday nights. I'd play Wall Street during lunch hour, the pre-Broadway shows. I just made it a full job. I got 50 sets a week in.
Oh my
gosh. And plus, the din of traffic noise, you have to make people laugh and you have to give them a great closer. Otherwise they won't put money in your basket at the end of your show. I was making up to $500 a week in spare change performing on the street and getting 50 sets a weekend.
Well, so that's a combination of two things. One, we want everyone to understand that $500 a week back in the 80s was huge money.
It's like $2,000. Yeah, it's like $2,000 or $3,000 now. Yeah.
Huge money. And the trick to any art form in the variety arts, whether it's magic, ventriloquism, or even stand-up comedy, it's stage time. And getting that many sets in day after day, week after week is what made you a really good ventriloquist. That is an awesome start. Was it scary being on the streets or just easier, harder?
No, it was empowering, dude. It was the ability. I realized that if there was ever a nuclear holocaust, I could earn money in the bomb shelter for food. I mean,
that's
and then I went
picture.
to England. Yeah, and then I went to England and Paris, and I performed. I did magic. I did ventriloquism in England on the streets there, and then in Paris, I performed on the streets. Since I didn't speak French, I did magic, and I ended up working in a nightclub in Pigalle in Paris in 1977, which was one of the most amazing experiences ever.
What? Excuse me for interrupting. So what gave you the idea to go to England and Paris? I mean, I've spent my whole life in the U.S., always dreamed about it, but as a young man, you found your way over there using your talents.
Here's the crazy bit. My a relative was Arthur Fromer. If you remember those books from the 60s, 70s, 80s, Europe on $5 a day. He had a travel agency. He was married into someone from my family, and he had a little rule on his books that if any family member wanted to travel on an empty seat on any of his charter flights anywhere they flew around the world, all you had to do is show up and get on it. And this are the days when you remember you didn't need an ID to get on an airplane.
Right. And there was no restrictions. But what a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And
so I went to Europe
a
couple of times. Yeah, I sure did. I went to Europe a few times and performed on the street. But when I got back from Europe and the weather started turning cold and I went, oh my God, you can't perform on the street in the winter. So a friend of mine told me about Catch a Rising Star and the comic strip. So I went down and signed up at 5:00, Catch Rising Star, and I watched all the comedians go on, and I finally got on at 2 a.m. in front of 3 drunk people who could care less who was on stage, and I bombed. And every comic has a Catch a Rising Star bomb story. And then I went over to the comic strip. I got into there, and I started performing as during the winter. That was my place. I would go to the comic strip. They didn't pay the comedians then. If you were lucky, you could beg for French fries or beg a 50-cent bus fare from Seinfeld or Eddie Murphy. And all those guys were my peers that I started out with. So everybody from Joe Piscopo to, oh my God, Peter Bales. I don't know if you know these guys, Mark Schiff. These are all the guys that I hung out with every night. Larry Miller, every night, night after night after night. Now, you know, Seinfeld and Larry Miller, those guys got like the best spots of the night. I still was a late nighter, you know, like 2 a.m, 1 a.m. But that's where I got my chops in the comedy world. And as you know, in 1978, there were only 5 or 6 clubs in the United States.
Yeah, it was as my audience has heard, when I opened, I was the 12th full-time comedy club in the country.
There you go.
Was 1980. But in the late 70s, you were really building the foundation of your comedy career as a stand-up comic / ventriloquist at some of the best rooms with some of the best people. I mean, you named off some of the best, some of my favorite acts.
You know how many hours, R.I.P., you know how many hours I have sitting at the bar with Gilbert Gottfried?
Oh my gosh.
That's at the Improv. Then I moved over to the Improv and I started doing, working out at the Improv. So I would sit at the bar. What happens is you go at like 5 or 6 o'clock, you put your name on a list, and then you'd wait around until whoever was the maitre d' put you on. It was Lucian of the comic strip, and it was, who's the guy that ran HBO for all those years? I can't remember his name. Anyway, he started pretty much HBO, but he was the maitre d' that put all the comics on the Improv. And so I would sit there at the bar and I'd say, so Gilbert, where do you live? I live in a revolving door. No, really. Seriously, Gilbert, where's your apartment? It's a revolving door on Madison Avenue. I go, no, come on, just be serious with me. I am being serious. And that was literally the conversation I would have with Gilbert. It would just be nonsensical every time. But
he was a great guy, though, and he definitely liked to connect with his peers, other comics, and was a great supporter of young talent at the time. Do you remember? Now you had everybody. Chuck Wood was your first and longest lasting ventriloquial figure. Chuck was the one that you really built your act on. How did you find ventriloquism working in those early rooms in New York? Because not every club is welcoming to variety acts. I happen to have loved all the variety acts and would have them almost every week in the middle spot or something. But a lot of the clubs, weren't that hot on it. Did you find any resistance with the comics or with the clubs?
Not really, because my show produced. I always got laughs, and even to this day, I claim I have a laugh every 10 seconds. Some comics will do a paragraph or set up, punchline. My show has always been set up, punchline, set up, punchline. So a laugh every 10 seconds. So I always produced when I was, whether it was free at the Improv or the comic strip, or I got on board with Jerry Stanley. He was the first one to kind of bring comics outside of Manhattan. And we all would take these 1 to 4 hours, the Bronx, Long Island, New Jersey. And it would be 3 comics. And I can't tell you how many times I spent in a van with 2 other comics going to do these one-nighters. And I won't name names, but it's everybody. Everybody
right.
I hung out with. But I didn't get much pushback until I was a headliner in the late 80s, and I wanted to do the Yuck Yucks or the whatever the Canadian clubs. I forgot the guy's name. Breslin, I think his name was Mark Breslin. Is he the one that ran the Just for Laughs and Canadian clubs?
I'm not sure, but Yuck Yucks is a famous club in Canada. The Last Laugh, there was a few places.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to slip into this
he was the only one. He was the only one that said, oh, you're really funny. I saw your act. I go, great. When can I do a show? When can I get on your clubs? He went, sorry, we don't book variety acts.
Oh, geez. Well,
so I went, well, I guess you're racist.
Well, I'm glad that was the only experience you had, because I'd heard from other magicians and jugglers and stuff that there was a few rooms that were not as warming to the variety acts. But
you know why, Scott? You know why? Because with jugglers, magicians, and ventriloquists, either they're great or they suck. There really is no in between.
Well,
and a bad juggler and a bad magician and a bad ventriloquist is cringeworthy.
That's
true.
You
really don't want to watch. You just don't want to watch it. You don't want to watch it. You want to be in the same room. So I get that.
Well, I wanted to slip in something that you did have success at the big clubs like Catch and stuff in New York, but it wasn't like you were starting off like an open micer. You had those years on the streets that you already had spent, like 50 shows a week honing your craft.
Yeah, but I still was a late nighter though. At comic strip, I didn't play Catch. I only played the comic strip, and then I moved to the Improv. I was a late nighter, but I wasn't the last guy on, but I certainly wasn't, in the prime spot.
So from a respect point of view, there might have been a little distinction there. What brought you out to California, or do you remember how you came to work for Laughs Unlimited?
I sure do. I came out because my girlfriend moved to New York. She moved to LA. She was an actress in New York. She moved to LA to get more Hollywood parts, and I kind of moved along. I had grown up in Southern California. I lived in West LA and in South Pasadena, and I moved away to Chicago when I was 12. So it was like coming home, and this is 1979, 80. I came to LA, and I went to the Ice House, and I auditioned to be an opening act with Bob at the Ice House. And he goes, Dave, you're great. That's fantastic. This was in October of 1979. He goes, oh, you're great. I can put you a spot as an opening act in February. I went, that's great. 3 months from now. He went, no, February 1981. I went, what? He said, over a year from now? He goes, well, yeah, I'm all booked up. But what I realized many years later, what he did was he saw that I had potential but needed more time on stage. So he basically gave me a spot in a year so that I would obviously be much, much better by the time I graced the stage at the Ice House. And I think that was
that's funny. And we want to explain to the audience, you're talking about Bob Fisher, who I actually just interviewed for the podcast. So folks, keep an eye out for that one. But Bob Fisher was one of the original rooms in Southern California and was working a lot of this talent that was coming out of New York, the Seinfelds, the Larry Millers, and the lot, giving you a gig a year ahead so that you might refine yourself as a comedy club stand-up, which is different than the streets. I mean, maybe you'd be better
I've been
to
off the
explain
streets, but it's different than a late nighter in a free club in New York City where you work out material. That's based.
That's true. That's true.
I didn't come out of the Improv as one of the top acts. I came out of the Improv as someone who I got spots at the Improv, but I was not like the main act. But let me tell you how we met. I moved to LA and I have no work and I've got only a crappy 20 minutes as a ventriloquist. So I saw that there was no comedy nights in LA at any of the universities. So I went around to UCLA, USC, Northridge University, Loyola University, and I said, hi, I can bring you 3 comedians. I put on my producer hat. I'm going to bring you 3 comedians from the Comedy Store. And I'll charge you $200. I'll pay each comedian. Everybody gets $50, including me. I'll MC it. And all the universities bought it. So the UCLA, it's still going on today, by the way. It still has a comedy night in their Kirchhoff Coffee House, which I started in 1980.
That's fascinating, Dave. I mean, I didn't know that you produced as well.
Yeah, all the universities bought my show, and I hired everybody. I paid $50 to Michael Keaton. I paid $50 to Jim Carrey. You name them, I had them. And I went to the Comedy Store and I say, hey, I've got this university gig, and it's only $50. Everybody gets paid $50. Hey, why would I do that? I said, because it's the best audience in the world to try out material, and you're not on stage at the Comedy Store where there are agents, and you're not on stage at the Improv where there are agents and managers to judge you. And so that ran for 2-3 years. But in exchange for that, Scott, I got all these comedians to recommend the local clubs as me as an opening act.
Oh, that's smart.
And yours was one of the first clubs because it was the worst one in California. Just kidding. So yours was one of the yours was one of the first clubs that I heard about. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know how I ended up getting there, but I remember I was an opening act, and at your club, I worked with Leno, I worked with Bob Saget, I worked with so many great comedians, and I thank you for having faith in me. And you know what? I love the Old West, and where your club is in Old Sacramento, or where it was, I love the idea that whole downtown looked like the Wild West of the 1890s with boardwalks and it just was so much fun.
Yeah, so
so much fun to be there.
It's great that you have those memories. He's talking about my original room in Old Sacramento, which had cobblestone streets and wooden sidewalks. Yeah. We were in a building that was built in the 1800s with old brick, and we were underground in a basement where there was a lot of atmosphere, low ceilings. It was one of the best rooms I've ever seen for comedy. And
you want to hear a Jay Leno story from your club?
Sure.
I think I was a middle act. And I was working with Jay, and we're in the dressing room between shows. And I go, I said, "Hey Jay, how was your set?" He goes, "Yeah, it was okay. I put out an automatic pilot, and I started, adding columns of numbers in my head." I went, "What?" He goes, "Oh yeah, when I put my show on automatic pilot, I start adding numbers, columns of numbers in my head." And I went, "Would you just explain that to me again?" He basically, I'm pretty sure he was bullshitting me. But basically would say, I believed him because I was the middle act and he was the great Jay Leno. And this is, by the way, before he did the Tonight Show.
Oh yeah, no. A lot of people know he worked my room, but it was years before he was famous. But I think he was pulling your leg. But
I'm pretty sure.
You never know, because Jay really had his set down. The reason I would disagree with that presumption was he was really good at interacting with the audiences. You know, he would do 10 minutes, 15 minutes of material, and then he'd go to the audience and talk and just make some comedy. And then he would close with 15, 20 minutes of material. So you couldn't do that and add numbers, but I think that's funny that the headliner was kind of pulling some crap on the opening and feature acts.
No kidding.
And so now, real quick, as a ventriloquist, can you explain to the audience how you came up with Chuck Wood and how that relationship came about? Or is Chuck there? Maybe he can tell us.
Chuck's just a puppet, Scott.
Yeah, but he's a terrific character. And he gave me a lot of shit over the years, so I kind of owe him.
Chuck Wood was a mail order puppet that was basically the angry part of my personality, which I got laughs by him being caustic and insulting. And when a puppet insults a big, huge guy in the front row, everybody knows the puppet's not real, but everybody also sees the threat that's there from the puppet to the human. And there's a dichotomy where you think, oh my God, this big guy's getting threatened by this little guy, and we find that funny. So the fact that he gets to say the things we wish we could say, that's the psychology behind the classic little boy, nasty ventriloquist puppet. But if you remember back in those days, I had a routine where I carved a hand that held a joint, and he lit a joint. I lit a joint, and he smoked pot on stage. It was tobacco, obviously, but do you remember he smoked pot on stage and got the munchies and dry mouth and everything?
Well,
do you remember that?
What was amazing about you, Dave, is that you were never stagnant. It seemed like, I mean, first off, I booked you year after year because you always gave your all to the audience. You're very funny. You're a talented ventriloquist. But I also appreciated the fact that you always were working on things. Yes, I remember that bit, but it led to, in what I think is one of your famous one of a kind, is that you created Chuck Wood in an animatronic way, where you could, and ladies and gentlemen, you have to go to YouTube and use the Googler and find Dave Strassman's videos, because you will see where he and Chuck get in an argument, and you would literally leave the stage and there was this great long pause. This is where your talents and acting came out, because you knew just amount of time, and then all of a sudden Chuck Wood would come to life, in essence, without you, turn his head, blink his eyes, and start talking, and it always got a whoa from the audience. And I, as a producer, love that moment. No matter how many times I saw it, that's to me the most memorable part. I know your career's gone on and on and on.
Well, no. That is the defining moment of my career, because prior to that, I was a middle act. I was starting to headline, but I wasn't a very high paid headliner. And after a drunken night with a friend of mine, we decided, that's why I radar control airplanes. And I still do. I actually just finished another plane, and I fly them all the time. And I used the robotics, the servos and the receivers, to stick in Chuck Wood. We had this night, what happens if he comes to life? Wouldn't that be cool? We were all drunk, and the next day we said, well, let's get going. He had a friend that worked at the NASA Ames Research Facility in Berkeley, California. And this guy machined me a clutch that allowed me to work Chuck regularly manually with my fingers, and then engage the clutch and have Chuck work robotically. And his head turned right and left, and his eyes looked right and left, and his mouth open and closed. And when I first did that on stage for the very first time in 1987, I think it was, I did it at a cellar in New York City. The audience they freaked and were ready to run for the door. Oh my God, here's a ventriloquist puppet coming to life. And
Well,
when
isn't
that
this about
happened,
the same time as Chucky 2 came out, the movie?
a couple of years later,
Was
but I'm
it?
pretty sure. Yeah, it was a little bit later, but
Maybe you inspired him, Dave.
well, you know what? Believe it or not, 2 years before that movie came out, I was running around Hollywood saying, "We got to help me do a movie about a puppet that could kill people." But I don't know if I have any influence. So once that happened, once I had this hook, and I'm the first ventriloquist not to put robotics in their puppet, but the first ventriloquist to add the element of theater like that. Now, again, I have to quantify that. There were guys in the 1880s that had theatrical shows where they were literally on stage, and they were dramas and comedies with ventriloquist dolls and puppets. But this was using robotics and this element of theater to blow the audience away, and that suddenly got me on all the TV shows, Comic Strip Live and Arsenio Hall and Sunday Night Funnies, and then I started playing Vegas and Reno, and I played the Sands, and not as an opening act, but as a featured act, or not in the improv comedy show, but actually at Caesar's Palace. I started opening for all these acts at Caesar's, Tahoe, Caesar's Vegas, and my career really started taking off. And television commercials
had to be an exciting time for you, Dave. I mean, that's like the golden ticket, when you created something that people weren't used to seeing. I worked with Jay Johnson, Willie Tyler, and Lester, a lot of ventriloquists, but Chuck would come into life seemingly by himself on stage and talking to the audience, and that whole thing really, I mean, I understand from a producer's point of view why that puts you on the top of the heap at the time, and getting all those TV shows, and then Vegas. I mean, you really, your career took off, and not only success and some fame, but I bet the money was pretty good too.
It was pretty good. But the other thing is I was always pretty much a B act. I was never really like a Seinfeld, or I didn't reach any kind of a great notoriety in the United States. I would just say it was mediocre, but it was good. I did Chevy commercials. I did local grocery store commercials here. I did a grocery store called Ralph's here, which is part of the whole Safeway. I was the spokesman for that. We had a puppet in that show, and I started doing episodics, and it was a pretty intense time in my life, late 80s. And then, but I think as a ventriloquist, no one wanted to ever take that next step and propel me further because of the fact I could just see someone going to their boss and going, "I found this great act. Let's make a sitcom. What does he do? He's a ventriloquist." Before they can say the word "quist" out, they'd get a no, just because there's a stigma. There's a stigma attached to geek acts like ventriloquists, jugglers, and mime, and magicians. And it's back to what I said: they either suck or they're great.
Well, a great reference point would be Jay Johnson, who's another terrific ventriloquist who had brilliant. Great success on the TV show Soap, and yet, despite his notoriety, despite his humor and his really solid characters, his monkey character has been seen a lot. He never got offered a show, right? He reached a certain level as a backup character on Soap, but it didn't, and he had a certain amount of fame and notoriety, but he's not a Seinfeld or a Leno. So it wasn't just you, like you said, it's the variety arts aren't taken quite as seriously, and I'm not sure why. I always respected them, but
that's where the British Commonwealth comes into play, and I'll go there in a second. They do exalt variety acts as valuable as a great musician or a great actor or a great movie star. And it's because of the music hall and pantomime traditions is part of their cultural psyche, that they have talent shows and these local talent shows and pantomimes. You're familiar with the pantomime? It's pretty much a Christmas show where there's always a villain and there's singing and dancing, and some men wear women's clothes, and it's just It's fun and it's great for the whole family. It's a bit naughty, and everybody is treated with respect regarding how they're presented in the show, if that makes sense. So a ventriloquist would be just as valuable and respected as the best dancer or singer or dramatic actor in these shows.
And I think that's interesting to share with the audience, because that is not something that I think we as Americans are aware, that in Hollywood and New York and the bastions of entertainment, that there is a hierarchy and that the variety acts don't get the same respect. But this
they're ridiculed. Variety acts in America are ridiculed, and they're done so. And you can just start it with the Gong Show. The Gong Show was the one that said variety acts are silly. Let's not only take the good ones and praise them, but let's take the bad ones and gong the hell out of them.
Well, the Gong Show, for all you young people, was a talent show. It was set up as a contest, but it was really just a lot of bad acts, and every now and then there'd be a gem. It's kind of the early version of America's Got Talent. But so this is a great bridge to what led you to Australia and New Zealand, which we want to let the audience know you've had huge success. You're still doing sold out shows in these two countries. You've done some television. Explain how that came about.
1991, I got a call to play Melbourne, Australia Comedy Festival, and I went down there. And by the way, I already had a solid hour headlining act at the time. I was playing the Improv and the Funny Bones in the United States and commanding pretty much top dollar plus airfare and hotel at the comedy clubs, and not having done the Tonight Show or Letterman. So I was, which I never have, by the way.
And by the way, the reason you're explaining this is it was unique for somebody to reach high pay headliner in the club level without some, like you said, Letterman or Tonight Show TV. So it was really, to put it plainly, you earned your way from the streets to the stages to the headlining spot, kind of the hard way. I mean,
it was through attrition. Yeah. Through attrition. And plus, I always brought a different show whenever I came to any comedy club, even though I played them. So, go to Australia. It was a 3-week tour, and at the time, I had Chuck Wood, my teddy bear character, and my 3 dinosaurs, which were robotic, that sang Bohemian Rhapsody as I conducted them, which is an amazing feat of robotics, and my alien character, Kevin. And I arrived in Australia for 3 weeks, and I sold out. And I did all the local television shows, or the national television shows in Australia. And this teddy bear character, which I had no idea, resonated with the Australians, because the British Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, England, Ireland, Scotland, and South Africa, all have teddy bears in their culture. It's something like... it's crazy. They go fanatical over teddy bears. There's teddy bear picnics, teddy bear chocolate, teddy bear this, teddy bear that. Everybody had one. Everybody loved them. And my teddy bear character, who is a sad little, depressing, almost a Charlie Brown character, just always depressed.
I think of more of him as an Eeyore.
Yeah, kind of like Eeyore. Yeah, that would work as well.
And ladies and gentlemen, we want to explain that Chuck Wood was your main ventriloquial figure, but
Correct.
Over the years, you created its Ted E Bear. It's very important to have the E separate. You have Angel, Alien. I didn't know about the dinosaurs.
There's so many puppets, and then half of them are rotting away in trunks in my in my garage.
But the point is I mentioned it earlier in this interview. As a producer and as a club owner, I appreciated that you always brought something different. For me, in my shows back in the 80s, it was all Chuck Wood and the animatronics and what you were able to do there. But as you go into the 90s, you're now stretching your ventriloquism talents and doing all these different characters. So when you get to Australia, you had you'd already developed Ted E. Bear.
Yeah. Well, just barely, but he wasn't. There was Chuck that was loved in America, and Teddy was almost an afterthought And he didn't get good responses when I was performing in the clubs with Teddy Bear. And the alien character was really not very well fleshed out. The dinosaurs are just eye candy, pretty much singing the greatest song on the planet as I conducted them, Bohemian Rhapsody. But what happened was Australia went off and through the roof. And from all the national television shows I did everything from cooking shows to fishing shows to so many different shows with all my characters that I became a kind of an instant celebrity, which they offered me a TV series in 1990. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Then I went to Edinburgh in 1996, and my show won several awards. I was pretty much the darling of the comedy, all the comedy submissions of that year.
Well,
1996.
I just want to let the audience know, being a champion at Edinburgh Comedy Festival is monumental. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That is something that comics would strive for and most didn't achieve. And to get that kind of recognition, and I wasn't aware, and now that I think about it and you've explained it, it makes sense, but I wasn't aware how strong the variety acts were in England and that part of the world. And the celebrity in Australia sounds very familiar because I recently interviewed Arj Barker, who had a similar situation where he kind of went over there on a lark and got on the late night talk show in almost overnight celebrity.
Yeah.
And he's milked that for the last 20 years. You took Teddy Bear and created this monster show that you're still selling out theaters to this day.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. I think what Edinburgh did for me was it gave me the Royal Variety Show. I got offered a television series in Australia, which led to 4 years of TV series in England, New Zealand, and Australia. My chat show called Strassman, where I interviewed celebrity guests in all those countries. And while Chuck asked the questions we all wish we could ask. For example, in England, I interviewed Lorena Bobbitt. And Chuck asked, I said, by the way, you can find snippets of this on YouTube somewhere, but I said, Lorena, millions of men want to ask, millions of men share in me asking this one question. And Chuck goes, cut any good dicks lately? So that's the kind of stuff that I would do. And I would ask serious questions, and Chuck would come in and you know,
was the comic relief, right? It's like
exactly.
It's almost like an Abbott Costello, a Laurel and Hardy. You're the straight guy, and Chuck could throw out the zingers. I think it's genius, and it wasn't until I read your bio that I'd realized and learned that you had gotten your own shows. But as I said before we turned on the recorder, what a huge amount of success, Dave, and not given to you. You earned it from the streets on up. I mean, that's just amazing. So happy for you.
Yeah, and I'm unknown here in America, and I'd like to keep it that way because when I go,
well, this podcast won't change that.
No, it won't. It won't, thankfully. But no, I'm very well known in the British Commonwealth, and I just came back last week from a show I'm doing now. It's called The Chocolate Diet, and it's a massive set. I'm selling out. I just did 25 performances in 30 days. We traveled over 2,200 miles in Australia. This is the post-pandemic. Half of these gigs, by the way, people held their tickets for 2 years because I had all these tours that were canceled from the pandemic. And so I'm selling out 1,500 seat theaters, and most of the places are 2 shows a night. That's how crazy it is. But I bring a massive stage show with 180 lighting cues, and I've got a crew of 5. Everything fits in a 6-ton truck. I have massive sets and sound equipment and robotics and music, and it is truly a show, like a musical. Like the type of production value you'll find in a musical with massive sets and backdrops.
So are you four-walling your own shows and producing your own shows, or is there somebody paying for all this?
No, I am co-producing with my producer, David Foster from Foster Entertainment. He's based in Vegas. He started in Australia. He was the one that hired me at the Comedy Club in Melbourne, Australia, back in 1991. We've been working together ever since. Almost, how many years is that? Almost 40 years.
Well, I want to share with the audience that as being self-produced, you are actually able to cash in better than somebody that's just getting paid to do a gig. There's so many merchandise.
I share in the profits, but I also share in the expenses as well.
Well, yeah, I get that, but I just know from a producer's point of view that is, even when I was paying back in the day, which was big money, $1,000 or $1,500 to somebody to work for a week, as much as that was expensive back in the 80s, as the producer selling the beers and the drinks and the food and getting the ticket at the door, obviously I was able to make money.
But you must have made so much money. I remember I did the math at the Newport Beach Laugh Stop, and I figured out that there was a 2-drink minimum. There were 3 shows on a Saturday night. I was making maybe $50 for that 3 shows.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and the other comics are probably making a total of $500, including the headliner. Be like Great Scott the Magician, me, and some other acts. And I figured the 3 shows, 2-drink minimum at, I don't know, 250, 300 people. It came out to something like $60,000 gross for the night, just in alcohol and cover charge for the night. And I went, I'm in the wrong side of the business.
Well, no comment. Okay. No comment. All right. So, you've really taken off in Australia, New Zealand, and England. You've had your own shows. You've reached this level of success that you can self-produce, sold out concerts around the world. Huge success. I want to get into paleo nerds, but before we do, can you explain to the audience that after working with Chuck Wood for 2 decades, and he's still a major part of your show, how does a ventriloquist create Angel, Teddy Bear, these different characters? Is it a long process? Is it something you feel like you have to do, or do you do it because you're motivated to always improve your shows? Maybe share with the audience what you go through to do that.
Sure. When I had a show that evolved over 10 years from 1990 to 2000. And it was pretty much the same show that just got better and better and better. And by the success I had in Edinburgh, and then my own TV show in the 3 countries, then I played the West End of London. I had a run there, which was very successful. My show moved from comedy club to theater. And when it moved to theater, that means I had attentive audiences, not a stinking, smoking, drunken jerks who were heckling the whole time. You literally had people who were paying to come see you, and with their hands folded in their lap and their programs. And it was a new paradigm as far as being able to be subtle, being able to have comedy, but also add music, add lighting cues, add special effects, and bring a full-on production to what you can't do in the comedy club. And with that, I started performing. Australia is about a 3-year tour running 9 months over 3 years. And I would perform, because I had a child, I would only be gone for a month 3 times a year. So I would perform 3 non-consecutive months a year. So after that 3 years, I would have played Melbourne, Sydney, and all the other towns in between, and then New Zealand and England. I'd have to come up with a new show. So I could either take the existing puppets from the last show and just rewrite a new episode like you do for The Simpsons, or I could create characters. And over the years, I would just create characters based on whatever the show was about. For example, Teddy Bear he wanted to leave and farewell and go away and run away. And we had a talent show to replace him. And that created like 7 new characters, which only ran in that show. And they're now in trunks in my garage, except Angel, I believe, was this robot woman who is now she's no longer in my show anymore, but she lasted for two shows. But basically what I've been doing the last few shows is giving my puppets new goals, new foibles, new dreams, new hopes, new dramas to explore. And they're very culturally relevant. For example, my show now, The Chocolate Diet, is about addiction. And Teddy Bear's addicted to chocolates, and I convince him to go on a diet. He comes back as impossibly thin, anorexically thin, so he went too far. Then we need to put him back on a better, more healthier diet. He comes back in the show as so fat he's got rolls. And then I actually had two other puppets built to represent him in those states of dietary distress. Chuck Wood comes out in a blonde wig with a girl power t-shirt, and he's pretty sure he's transgender, that he was carved out of the wrong piece of wood.
No way.
Yeah, so it's a completely awesome transgender pro-LGBTQ plus routine.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
culturally relevant. I had people in the LGBTQ community approve the routine and validate it so that it's not insulting, and that it actually is pro women and pro culturally acceptable. And I'm actually making statements.
Wow, that's incredible,
it's
Dave.
awesome. Yeah, it is awesome. And listen, Grandpa Fred is addicted to heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, downers, uppers, and marijuana because the home gives that to him to keep him sedated.
Well, so you've given us the motivation behind it, but I know there's more than that. You have to actually develop the ventriloquial figure, but then how do you come up with the different voices? Do you see the character and then find the voice, or do you create the voice and then build the character to meet it?
Well, my show now contains really 5 characters, which are my family of puppets I've had now for about 20 years. And it's Grandpa Fred, Sid the Beaver. Sid the Beaver is like a Catskill comic. Chuck, hold on. Kevin the Alien is this character, and then Teddy Bear is this, and Chuck Wood is this. And in my last show, Teddy, I did a 20-minute routine where I did 6 voices for 20 minutes, and it was this amazing dialogue, well, not dialogue, but a six-log of 20 puppets in a 6-way conversation for 20. Sorry, I'm all confused now. 5 puppets and myself in a 20-minute conversation that I do all the voices live, but I did their mouths robotically with a handheld device that controlled each one of their 5 mouths with each one of my
No way. How's that
If
even
you can
possible? I know
with a lot of rehearsal.
I mean, I
had to quit drinking. I quit drinking for this show.
No.
I haven't drunk in 20. Yeah, I'm 10 years sober now, and I quit drinking because I had to. I could not do it with any time. I had to have this mental acuity to do this. If you go up on YouTube and look up, I think it's 5 puppets in 20 seconds, something like that. Strassman, 5 puppets in 20 seconds. There's a snippet of me doing the voices, but that was a 20-minute long routine. That was pretty crazy.
Well, what I want to make clear to the audience, because this is a podcast and they can only hear, they can't see it. So definitely go to the Googler, check out YouTube. There's a lot of videos of Dave. You can also go to his website, davidstrassman.com. But just to explain that the challenge of creating one animatronic puppet, Chuck Wood, and being able to control that, to me, was amazing. The fact that you were able to, I just can't even imagine.
I had a computer control pre-program arms and heads and eyes, right, for 20 minutes. But I, with a live device in my hand, controlled all the mouths.
Wow.
And what happened was these routines were in sections of about 1 minute. So if I started getting faster, I could slow it down. And if I started doing the routine slower, I could speed it up. If that makes any sense.
I mean, again, my hat's off to you, Dave. And you're such an artist. But to take the time and the ingenuity to create that kind of situation is in the fact that you keep topping yourself. That's what's amazing. You know, a lot of people find a certain level of comfort and they just stay there.
Yeah.
And
well, you need to shout out two comics. First of all, Rich Scheidner was the one who I hired back in 1999 to write my first real show that would go in the theater. And I kind of owe that to him, to putting me on a much higher level of creativity and cleverness with my show. And then subsequently, I hired Steve Altman, who pretty much does mostly music and film. And he had a stand-up show for a while, but he has been my co-writer for the last 10 years, almost 15 years. And he has co-written all my shows, which have gone to DVD and YouTube and all that stuff. So I wanted to shout out to those brilliant collaborators.
Yeah, it's great to have a support team, but you're still the creative leader of the group, and what you've accomplished is amazing. Now, before we get too late in the show, we're wrapping it up. You also have outside interest, and I want everybody to understand that not only is he a world-class ventriloquist and a creator of amazing characters in animatronics to make things work and using computers. I mean, it just goes on and on, Dave. You were not satisfied. As a hobby, you're a paleontologist, and you and Ray Troll, is it? Toll?
Yep. Ray Troll.
Have created a podcast. So everybody out there in podcast land, you want something different and interesting, check out Paleo Nerds. I've listened to a couple shows. It's fascinating. Although I was disappointed in your latest show, you kind of denounce your ventriloquism. You go, I'm done with that for now. I want to talk paleontology.
Yeah.
But tell us how Paleo Nerds came about.
Sure. I have always had an academic interest in the earth sciences, and I am a voracious reader of that, everything from history to cultural anthropology to astronomy to paleontology. And back in the 80s, I started reading all the books that academics, paleontologists would have read, rather than anyway, I dove deep into it. And when I moved to Alaska, which is another story, back in the 2000s, I became friends with Ray Troll, who's one of the preeminent paleontological artists. And he's also an amazing artist whose works grace the covers of books and T-shirts and museums. And we became friends. And in the pandemic, before that, he invited me on a trip with 24 paleontologists with the head of the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History down the Amazon.
No.
So I spent 2 weeks on the Amazon with 24 paleontologists. And because of my years of studying earth sciences and paleontology, I was able to walk the walk and talk the talk on these academic levels. And I know my ages, I know my terms, and I know my evolution.
That is so cool. Yeah. You went down.
Yeah.
That must have been exciting and scary.
It wasn't scary, but it was a game changer as far as understanding the diversity of life on this planet. But back to the paleontology. So I would go, and every summer I'd go up to Ketchikan, Alaska, where Ray lives, and we'd all go out and look for fossils in Southeast Alaska. And I'd always be, well, Ray, what's this? He goes, well, Dave, that is a Devonian coral 430 million years ago. You know, this was once an ancient sea, and it was a warm, shallow sea. And in the ocean, and so he was always this kind of mentor and explainer to me. And during the pandemic, you know, how I was literally about 3 months in, I was going crazy. I was scrolling Facebook and I was watching Squid Game. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I thought, what if we started a podcast? And I have audio editing capabilities, and I've been editing stuff for my shows for many years. So I said, Ray, let's do a podcast. And he has the connection to the top paleontologist on planet Earth just through his networking. And our first guest is the head of the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, Kirk Johnson. He's the host of all these Nova shows, and he's, you know, right-hand man with David Attenborough. And from there, we started interviewing the most amazing scientists, nature writers, Academy Award-winning directors, all have to do with deep time paleontology, dinosaurs, trilobites, and it's culminating, by the way, we just did our 55th episode, where I'm editing the 56th as we speak. We're on 5 or 6 NPR stations around the country, so we're getting a little bit of notoriety on NPR. And 2 weeks from now, I go to Montana to dig for a juvenile Tyrannosaurus Rex with the Museum of the Rockies. So I'm going to a dinosaur dig, with my son. Yeah, we're going out there.
Oh, man, that's incredible. You are definitely a paleo nerd. And from listening to the shows, what I think is an interesting dynamic is that a lot of podcasts are garbage, and the ones that have teams sometimes figure it out and sometimes don't. But what I like about yours is that Ray and you have distinctive roles. He's obviously the knowledge, that book of knowledge, but you know enough to ask the right questions, and you know how to kind of punch it up a little bit. So it's not this droll scientific
garbage. No, I put in sound effects, and if we're talking about the ocean, sometimes you hear the ocean in the background, and I always make sure we have music as interstitial breaks, and it's really a lot of fun. And want to hear something crazy? You have a podcast, you do the editing. I am editing in SoundForge on Windows 7.
No way.
I'm in a virtual machine on my MacBook Pro that I'm using SoundForge Windows 7 because I know it like the back of my hand.
But you're basically using ancient software to do this, this paleontological podcast. That's so funny.
I know.
Well, you have had such a diverse life and career, and having something fun like that to share with your son and to take you away from show business.
Well, I've got to thank you, Scott. I have to thank you for being one of the first clubs to book me, believe in me, and to hold me back from becoming a middle act until I really deserved it. Even though at the time, when you're an opening act, you're doing 20 minutes. You're getting paid, I don't know what it was a week, $150 or something a week. I remember I used to fly PSA up there. I think I once drove there a couple times, but the fact that a club owner asks you back means they believe in you. And that belief is what keeps you going when you don't have enough money for rent, you don't have enough money for gas, and you look at your calendar. Back then we had these day planners. I look at my calendar and it'd be empty. And you go, how am I going to eat? How am I going to pay rent? But I have to thank you, Scott. You were one of the first clubs to give me the validity that kept me going.
Well, you're welcome, but I also took advantage of your talents, and I remember I would sit down with my planner, and I would give talented guys like you, 3-6 weeks a year, and a lot of times the comics would say that would be the foundation that would build other bookings on, because when I found somebody like you that could really entertain my audience, was always working, was always being creative and bringing something different, that it's my job as the producer to kind of take advantage of that, but to also encourage it so that you become the headliner that I'm going to be able to star in my shows long before anybody else. And the fact that you took that along with all your street work on to having your own shows in England and Australia is just been such an amazing career. And just that if I had a small part of it makes me proud. And I know you have to be extremely proud of everything you've accomplished. And to top it off, you're smart. And you've got Paleo Nerds, where you have a chance to talk about something that is kind of a hobby, but that you really enjoy. Congratulations, David.
And you know what? We're this close to interviewing Attenborough, so we're almost there. But,
that would be
that's
a
not confirmed yet.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be the gift of a lifetime.
For people that aren't aware, he is like the host or the voice of almost every science.
He is the voice of everything paleontology. There's Scott Edwards having sex with a small creature.
Well, Dave, this has been such a terrific and interesting interview. I'm so glad that we're able to connect and spend some time together. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not kidding. You got to go check out all his videos on YouTube. David Strassman is his name. He's a top world-class ventriloquist. You can also go to davidstrassman.com. And for all the podcast listeners, be sure to look up and listen to Paleo Nerds. Paleo, separate word, nerds. We all know how to spell that. Check it out because it's not only entertaining, but very interesting. Some terrific interviews.
And it's clean. It's clean.
Yeah, unlike
clean.
your shows now.
That's right.
When you worked for me, it was all clean, but I've been watching some of your recent videos. It's a little edgier than it used to be.
Yeah, well, it's Ricky Gervais dirty. How about that?
There you go. And anyway, Dave, thanks so much for being on the show with me. Ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check out his podcast, check out his videos. And if you get a chance to see a show, which is unlikely in the U.S., but if you're traveling and you get a chance to see any of his shows, don't miss out on the king of ventriloquism, Dave Strassman. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. David, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
All right. Stay tuned next week, ladies and gentlemen. Another great show. We'll be back to entertain you and educate you, I hope. Thanks for listening. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.